こういう事件が起きたことは非常に
Well, the purpose is to remind everybody, both in Tokyo and also that our daughter's murderer is still out there. We're very concerned that he hasn't been caught. We're very concerned that he might do this again. He has ruined our family. We would not like to see other families put through what we have been through.
The students watched her intently, their pencils poised over their notebooks, their faces filled with concentration. In the front of the classroom, Lindsay Ann Hawker moved between the desks, offering gentle corrections and warm encouragement. Teaching English in Japan had been her dream, an adventure that promised growth, excitement, and a deeper connection to the world beyond her hometown in England. For 22-year-old Lindsay, this was everything she had hoped for. A chance to experience a new culture, to push beyond her comfort zone, to leave a mark on the lives of her students. She had spent months preparing, poring over language guides, learning about customs, and mapping out the places she wanted to explore. She had always been curious, always eager to embrace the unknown. Japan, with its neon-lit streets and centuries-old traditions, had felt like the perfect fit. Back home, her family beamed with pride. She was doing something extraordinary, something bold. Every phone call was filled with excitement. New foods she had tried, places she had visited, stories of her students who were eager to learn. To those who knew her, Lindsay was exactly where she was meant to be. But no one could have imagined how quickly everything would change. One chance meeting, one stranger, one decision. And suddenly the bright, promising life that stretched before her came to a violent, unthinkable halt. How did a journey that began with such hope take a turn that no one saw coming? What happened in those final hours? And how did one of Japan's most intense manhunts begin with the disappearance of a young woman who had simply set out to teach? This is the story of Lindsay Ann Hawker. A story of trust, of choices, and of a search for justice that would grip two nations. The streets of Tokyo moved with purpose. Trains arrived on the second, never a moment early, never a moment late. Neon lights flickered above crowds that weaved in and out of towering buildings, their footsteps blending into the rhythmic hum of the city. To an outsider, it was a place of order, precision, and endless opportunity. For expatriates like Lindsay Ann Hawker, it was the perfect setting for adventure, a place where teaching English could open doors to an entirely new way of life. Japan had long been a destination for young travelers seeking something beyond the ordinary. For many, it was a bridge between cultures, a place where the old and new coexisted in harmony. The quiet reverence of shrines stood only blocks away from the pulsing nightlife of Shibuya. Ancient traditions thrived alongside cutting-edge technology. It was a country where safety was not just expected, but embedded into daily life. Crime rates were among the lowest in the world, and strangers could leave their belongings unattended in a cafe without fear. To many, Japan felt secure. And yet, beneath the surface of Tokyo's efficiency and hospitality, it was also a city where people could disappear into the crowd, where the anonymity of millions allowed secrets to remain hidden. For Lindsay, the excitement of living abroad had not faded in the months since she arrived. She had graduated from the University of Leeds with a degree in biology, but it was her love of travel and exploration that brought her here. Teaching was more than just a job. It was a chance to immerse herself in a new culture, to build connections, to experience the world beyond her own. Those who knew her described her as kind, intelligent, and full of life. She made friends easily, carrying with her an openness that made others feel at ease. But in March of 2007, that sense of wonder and discovery would be interrupted in a way no one could have imagined. Lindsay had settled into her new routine with ease. She shared an apartment with fellow teachers, navigating the complexities of a culture both welcoming and foreign. Each morning she commuted through Tokyo's intricate train system, stepping into classrooms filled with eager students. She had embraced the experience wholeheartedly, writing home about her adventures and the friendships she had made. Among those she met in her time in Japan was a man named Tatsuya Ichihashi. Their first interaction seemed unremarkable. A 28-year-old Japanese man, Ichihashi had approached her, expressing an interest in improving his English. He was not a student in her school, but rather someone she had encountered outside the structured environment of her workplace. It was not unusual. Many expatriates in Japan took on private students to supplement their income. These lessons were often casual, arranged in cafes or libraries, a way to connect with locals while earning extra money. But while Lindsay's life had been one of direction and purpose, Ichihashi's path had been markedly different. Born into privilege, he had been raised in a well-off family, his parents both medical professionals. He had access to the best education, the resources to build a future of his choosing. Yet, despite his upbringing, he had struggled to find his place. Aimless and detached, he drifted through life with no clear direction. While others his age were building careers and settling into adulthood, he had withdrawn from society, spending his days in isolation. Those who had encountered him before spoke of a man who was distant, someone who rarely made eye contact, whose presence felt unsettling without explanation. He had a history of fleeting interactions, brief connections with people that never seemed to last. His interests were unclear, his ambitions even less so. To some, he was simply another young man struggling to find his way. To others, there was something about him that felt off, and yet, Lindsay, kind and open-hearted, saw only the opportunity to help someone learn. A new acquaintance, another moment of cultural exchange in a city full of them. But in the days leading up to March 2007, events were set into motion that would forever alter the course of her life. What began as a routine, an everyday decision, would lead Lindsay down a path from which there was no return. For Lindsay Ann Hawker, the decision to move to Japan had been more than just an opportunity to work. It was the fulfillment of a lifelong dream. She had always been curious about the world beyond her hometown of Coventry, England. From a young age, she was the kind of person who embraced challenges, seeking out experiences that would broaden her understanding of different cultures and ways of life. Her journey to Japan had begun with a single decision: to apply for a position as an English teacher. Fresh out of the University of Leeds with a degree in biology, she could have followed a more traditional path. Many of her classmates were settling into research roles, pursuing further education, or stepping into careers that aligned with their studies. But Lindsay wanted something different. Teaching English abroad had become an increasingly popular option for young graduates seeking adventure, and Japan was one of the most sought-after destinations. Its reputation for safety, rich history, and unique culture made it an appealing choice. Her family had been supportive, though they would miss her deeply. Lindsay was the kind of daughter who kept in close contact, who shared every moment of excitement and uncertainty with those she loved. In the months since her arrival, she had written home often, filling her messages with stories of her students, the food she was trying, and the people she had met. She was thriving in her new environment, embracing the experience with open arms. But while Lindsay had come to Japan with a clear purpose, others were navigating their lives with far less certainty. Tatsuya Ichihashi had been raised in privilege. Born into a family of medical professionals, he had access to everything he could possibly need: education, financial stability, and opportunities that most could only dream of. His parents, both highly respected in their fields, had given him the foundation to succeed. But despite their efforts, Ichihashi had never found his place. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already begun withdrawing from the world around him. He attended a prestigious high school, but his academic performance was unremarkable. He briefly enrolled in university, but never completed a degree. While others moved forward, securing jobs and building lives of their own, Ichihashi remained stagnant. He did not work, he did not form lasting relationships. Instead, he retreated into solitude, spending his days in isolation, relying on his parents for financial support. Those who encountered him often described him as quiet, detached, difficult to connect with. He had no real friends, no social circles. Unlike the millions of young professionals in Tokyo striving to succeed, he seemed content, or at least resigned, to exist without purpose. He moved through life with an absence of ambition, disconnected from the expectations placed upon him. And yet, despite his reclusive nature, there were moments when he would reach out, when he would seek fleeting connections with those around him. It was during one of these moments that he crossed paths with Lindsay. Their meeting had been chance. Lindsay, like many foreign teachers, had a routine, a rhythm to her days that took her from the classroom to the city's cafes and restaurants. She was used to strangers approaching her, curious about where she was from, interested in practicing their English. Ichihashi had been one of those strangers. He had approached her, asking about private lessons. It wasn't uncommon. Many expatriate teachers in Japan took on private students to earn extra income. The interactions were usually simple, professional, nothing out of the ordinary, and Lindsay, ever kind, had agreed to meet with him. But in hindsight, something about their interactions stood out. Witnesses later recalled that Ichihashi had been persistent, insistent in his approach. Unlike others who expressed polite interest in learning, he had followed Lindsay after their initial meeting, making sure she did not forget him. There was something about his demeanor that lingered, something just slightly off. Still, Lindsay had no reason to feel threatened. She had been in Japan long enough to feel at ease, to trust in the overall safety of the country. She had arranged to meet Ichihashi in a public setting, a cafe, where they would conduct their first lesson. It was the same way she had met with other students before. There was no reason to believe this would be any different. While Lindsay went about her days filled with plans and purpose, Ichihashi's life remained unchanged. His existence had been one of avoidance, of work, of responsibility, of meaningful human connection. But there was something else beneath the surface, something that had gone unspoken. He had a history of unusual behavior. Those who had interacted with him before described him as awkward, unable to hold eye contact, prone to sudden mood shifts. There were whispers that he had struggled socially for years, that he had been unable to form relationships in the way others did. Some speculated that he carried a deep resentment toward the world, toward himself, toward the expectations he had never met. His isolation had only deepened over time. While others his age were building careers, he spent his days locked away in an apartment his parents paid for, avoiding interaction with the outside world. And yet, on rare occasions, he would reach out, seeking companionship in whatever form he could find. Lindsay had been one of those rare interactions, but for reasons no one yet understood, this time would be different. March 25, 2007, it was a day like any other, marked by the ordinary routines of Tokyo's millions. Lindsay had plans, lessons to teach, people to see. She had kept in touch with friends and family, as she always did. There was nothing in her messages to suggest she felt uneasy, nothing to indicate that she suspected anything unusual. She had agreed to meet Ichihashi that day, in a cafe where they would begin their lesson. She had done this before. She had no reason to expect that this meeting would be any different. And yet, something shifted in the course of that afternoon. At some point after they met, Ichihashi suggested they continue the lesson elsewhere. His apartment, he told her, was nearby. Perhaps it seemed like a natural extension of the lesson. Perhaps she hesitated, only for a moment, before deciding it was fine. But once Lindsay stepped through the doors of his apartment, the city outside, the bustling, safe, orderly city, became a world away. From that moment, Lindsay Ann Hawker was no longer just another English teacher in Japan. She was at the center of something no one had seen coming. The apartment was small. Like so many in Tokyo, space was a luxury and rooms were built for efficiency rather than comfort. A narrow hallway led to a compact living area, the walls bare, the furniture minimal. It was an unremarkable space, one of thousands just like it, indistinguishable from the outside. But what happened inside that apartment on March 25, 2007, would set off a series of events that no one could have foreseen. At first, it was a lesson like any other. Lindsay Ann Hawker had followed Tatsuya Ichihashi from the cafe where they had agreed to meet, to this place, a private setting where he said they could continue without the distractions of the busy city. She had no reason to feel unsafe. Japan was one of the safest countries in the world, and private tutoring sessions outside of formal classrooms were common. She had taught before in similar circumstances, and nothing about this meeting seemed out of the ordinary. But at some point, the atmosphere shifted. Perhaps it was a change in his tone, the way he moved, a moment of hesitation that made Lindsay uneasy. The details of what happened in those next moments can never be fully known. Only Ichihashi could say what went through his mind. But what is certain is that the situation escalated rapidly. Lindsay had no way of knowing that once she entered that apartment, the door behind her would close and her world would shrink to the walls around her. No one could hear her. No one knew where she was. A struggle ensued. The signs of it would be evident later, in the overturned furniture, in the marks of resistance found on her body. She fought. She tried to get away. She tried to make it out of that room alive. But Ichihashi was stronger, his desperation overpowering her attempts to break free. What had begun as an English lesson turned into an assault. And then, it turned into something worse. In those final moments, Lindsay Ann Hawker, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a teacher who had come to Japan full of hope and excitement, lost her life at the hands of a man who had spent years withdrawing from the world, only to take everything from her in an instant. Ichihashi did not run immediately. He did not panic in the way one might expect. Instead, he did something else. He stayed. And in the hours that followed, he tried to erase what had happened. He moved Lindsay's body to the bathroom. The tub, a standard Japanese soaking bath, became the place where he attempted to conceal what he had done. He filled it with sand, a futile effort to cover the evidence of his crime. But it was not enough. The truth would not remain hidden for long. Outside, the world carried on as usual. The trains kept running, people filled the streets, unaware that inside one ordinary apartment, something terrible had taken place. Days passed. Lindsay had not returned home. She had not contacted her friends. She had not called her family. And soon people began to worry. Her disappearance was reported, and it did not take long for the authorities to trace her last known whereabouts. They arrived at Ichihashi's apartment on March 26, 2007, just one day after she had gone missing. The moment they knocked on the door, the world inside that apartment changed once again. Ichihashi was inside when the police arrived. He knew why they were there. He knew what they would find if they stepped inside. And so, in those crucial seconds before the officers could react, he made a decision. He ran. Shoeless, desperate, he forced his way past the officers and bolted down the staircase. He did not stop to gather anything. He did not take a bag, a wallet, or even a change of clothes. He fled with nothing but the overwhelming need to disappear. By the time officers realized what had happened, he was gone. Inside the apartment, they found what he had left behind. Lindsay's body lay in the bathtub, covered in sand. The signs of struggle were evident, the bruises, the marks on her wrists, the clear indication that she had fought with everything she had. But in the end, she had not been able to escape. The crime was not just horrifying, it was deeply shocking. Japan, a country where violent crime was rare, had suddenly become the setting of an atrocity that would send shockwaves through two nations. News of Lindsay's death spread quickly. In the days that followed, headlines across Japan and the United Kingdom told the story of the young British teacher whose life had been taken in the most brutal way imaginable. The reaction was swift. Grief, outrage, disbelief. Her family, thousands of miles away in England, received the news no parent should ever hear. The daughter they had supported, encouraged, and loved, who had sent messages home about her adventures, was gone. The loss was immeasurable. In Tokyo, the foreign community of teachers and expatriates felt the weight of what had happened. This was a place where they had felt safe, where they had built their lives. And now, that sense of security was shaken. But one question remained unanswered. Where was Tatsuya Ichihashi? He had disappeared into the vastness of Japan, slipping away in a city of millions. He had vanished before the police could stop him. And with that, a new chapter of the story began. The hunt for a fugitive, a man who had taken a life and then escaped into the world, leaving behind only the horror of what he had done. In the days following March 25, 2007, the absence of Lindsay Ann Hawker did not go unnoticed. She was not someone who simply vanished without explanation. She had routines, commitments, and a strong connection with her loved ones. When she did not arrive for work, her colleagues grew concerned. Attempts to reach her by phone went unanswered. Her friends, who had grown accustomed to her warm presence and unwavering reliability, knew something was wrong. But it was back home, in England, where the first true wave of fear set in. Lindsay's family, who had always remained closely in touch despite the miles between them, had not heard from her. There were no emails, no calls, no messages. It was unlike her. It was impossible to ignore. Their concern turned into urgency. Calls were made. Authorities in Japan were contacted. Reports were filed. As information was pieced together, one detail stood out. Lindsay had last been seen with a man, someone who had approached her just days earlier under seemingly innocent circumstances. That man was Tatsuya Ichihashi. The timeline was clear. She had agreed to tutor him, they had met at a cafe, she had gone to his apartment, and then she had disappeared. It was enough for authorities to act. On March 26, 2007, just one day after Lindsay was last seen, Japanese police arrived at the small, ordinary apartment in Ichikawa, Chiba Prefecture. The door was shut, the air inside was still, and within those walls, the truth waited. When officers entered, they found evidence of a struggle, objects knocked over, signs of force, but it was what they discovered in the bathroom that confirmed every fear that had begun to take shape. Lindsay's body lay inside the bathtub, her remains covered in sand. It was a sight that needed no explanation. A life had been taken, and the man responsible had already vanished. The crime scene became the center of an investigation that would stretch far beyond the confines of that apartment. Every detail mattered. Every piece of evidence had the potential to lead authorities to the suspect they had missed by mere minutes. Forensic teams moved in. The body was examined, revealing clear indications of restraint, signs of a struggle that had ended in tragedy. Every mark, every trace, told a story of what had taken place in that room. They combed through the apartment, collecting fingerprints, DNA samples, and any traceable clue that could connect Ichihashi to the crime. But the connection was already undeniable. This was his apartment, his space, his last known location. There was no question of his involvement. The only question now was, where had he gone? The urgency of the investigation was compounded by the stark reality of the situation. In Japan, a country known for its low crime rate, cases like this were rare. A foreign national, an English teacher, a guest in their country, had been murdered in a way that sent shockwaves through both Japan and the United Kingdom. The weight of the case was immense. The pressure to find Ichihashi was immediate, but Ichihashi was gone. His escape from the apartment had been as sudden as the crime itself. In those few crucial moments when officers had knocked on his door, he had made his choice. He had slipped past them, sprinted down the narrow stairwell, and disappeared into the city. For weeks, then months, and eventually years, he would remain just out of reach. At first, the search focused on the surrounding areas. Posters were distributed, his image was circulated widely, but he had an advantage. He was familiar with the landscape, and he knew how to disappear. He had no credit cards, no phone that could be traced. He avoided train stations with surveillance cameras. He moved quietly, slipping through the cracks of a society that, despite its technological advancements, could not track a man who had chosen to erase himself. Then came a transformation. As the manhunt continued, sightings became sporadic and uncertain. Some believed they had seen him, but the details were inconsistent. Then, as time passed, the reports changed. His features seemed different. His face was no longer quite the same. That was when authorities learned the extent of his desperation. Ichihashi, aware that he was one of the most wanted men in Japan, had taken drastic measures to alter his appearance. He had cut himself off from the world, living in self-imposed isolation. He avoided contact with anyone who might recognize him. And then, in an effort to further distance himself from the man in the photographs being distributed nationwide, he did something few would dare to attempt. Using crude methods, he performed self-administered plastic surgery. He changed the shape of his nose, he altered his lips, he manipulated his facial structure using whatever means he could to distort the identity that had once been so easily recognizable. It was not the work of a professional. The scars, the asymmetry, the unnatural adjustments. They were all visible upon closer inspection, but for a man who had spent years hiding, it was enough. He moved from place to place, taking odd jobs that required no identification. He lived in shadows, never staying too long in one place. But no matter how much he changed his face, no matter how far he tried to run, the truth remained the same. Lindsay Ann Hawker was gone, and the man responsible could not hide forever. More than 3 years had passed since the day Lindsay Ann Hawker was taken from the world she knew. More than 3 years of grief for her family, of unanswered questions, of waiting. More than 3 years of evasion, of transformation, of a man slipping through the cracks of a society that had been searching for him. But in November 2009, the search came to an end. Tatsuya Ichihashi, now unrecognizable from the man who had first been accused, was caught at a ferry terminal in Osaka. His carefully constructed isolation, his attempts to disappear, had failed. He was taken into custody, and the justice system he had spent years avoiding was now waiting. The trial that followed in 2011 was not just about the events of March 2007. It was about everything that had happened since. The crime, the escape, the years spent on the run, the chilling confessions, and ultimately, the weight of a life taken too soon. Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. The prosecution presented its case with methodical precision, laying out the details of Lindsay's final moments, the struggle, the violence, the overwhelming evidence that pointed to a deliberate act. Forensic experts took the stand, reinforcing what had been clear from the start. The DNA evidence, the injuries, the signs of restraint, every detail painted the same picture. This had not been an accident. The prosecution leaned into the undeniable facts. Lindsay had been found in a sand-filled bathtub, her body bearing the marks of an assault. The scene itself suggested an attempt to conceal what had been done. There was no plausible explanation that could erase these truths. But the defense was prepared with a different narrative. Ichihashi's legal team argued that Lindsay's death had not been intentional, that what had happened was a terrible accident, that in his panic he had made the wrong decisions. Ichihashi himself took the stand. He did not deny that Lindsay had died in his apartment. He did not deny that he had fled. He did not deny that he had spent years running. But he insisted that he had never meant to kill her. The defense presented his version of events, that a struggle had ensued, that he had restrained her, that in doing so he had unintentionally suffocated her, that when he realized what had happened he had panicked. But the weight of the evidence was too great. The trial was not just about forensic evidence. It was about the mind of the man who had spent years hiding, and that mind had been laid bare in an unexpected way, through his own words. During his time on the run, Ichihashi had written a book, a memoir, a detailed account of his life in hiding, his surgeries, his survival. He had called it Until the Arrest. Within its pages, he chronicled the steps he had taken to avoid capture. He described performing painful procedures on himself to alter his appearance. He detailed his efforts to evade the law. He wrote about his loneliness, his guilt, his growing awareness that he could not run forever. But in those pages, one thing was absent: true remorse. The book, while revealing, did not offer the kind of confession that could undo what had been done. It did not erase the brutality of Lindsay's death. It did not change the facts. For Lindsay's family, who had sat through every moment of the trial, who had traveled across the world to see justice served, the book was just another reminder of the years of agony they had endured. And then the moment arrived. The courtroom fell into a tense silence as the verdict was read. Guilty. The sentence, life imprisonment. For the Hawker family, there was no victory in this moment, no relief that could undo what had been taken from them. But there was finality. Ichihashi would not walk free again. The public reaction was swift. Across Japan and beyond, there was a sense that justice had been served, but also lingering questions about how he had managed to evade capture for so long, about the decisions he had made even after the crime, about the life he had chosen to lead in the years that followed. As the trial came to a close, one truth remained above all others. Lindsay Ann Hawker had traveled to Japan to teach, to explore, to build a future filled with possibility. And though her life had been stolen, her name would not be forgotten. For Lindsay Ann Hawker's family, the verdict did not bring peace. There was no sense of closure, no relief in the knowledge that her killer would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Instead, there was the endless weight of loss, the realization that no court ruling could bring their daughter, their sister, their friend back. From the moment Lindsay was taken from them, her family had been relentless in their pursuit of justice. They had traveled across the world, sat through press conferences, pleaded with the public to keep her case alive. They had walked into a courtroom and faced the man who had stolen her future. They had fought for answers, for accountability, for change. But when the trial ended, their fight did not. Lindsay's father, Bill Hawker, became a voice for families who had suffered the unthinkable. In the years that followed, he spoke publicly about the deep pain of losing his daughter, about the years of waiting, about the frustration of watching her killer evade capture for so long. He fought for better protections, for stronger policies, for a justice system that could act swiftly before another family had to endure the same nightmare. For Lindsay's mother, her sisters, her friends, life moved forward in a way that never felt whole. Every milestone, every passing year, was marked by the absence of the woman they had known. Her laughter, her ambition, her kindness. She had once been a daughter who called home regularly, a teacher who had been eager to make a difference, a friend who had spoken of adventure and opportunity. And then, one day, she was simply gone. Beyond her family, the case left an imprint on the expatriate community in Japan. The foreign teachers, students, and professionals who had once seen the country as a place of opportunity now viewed their surroundings with a different lens. Conversations about safety, about meeting new acquaintances, about trust, about warning signs, became more urgent. For many, Lindsay's story was a stark reminder that even in the safest cities, danger could exist in the spaces they least expected. The media had followed Lindsay's case from the very beginning. Her disappearance, the shocking discovery of her body, the years of searching for Ichihashi. It had all played out in the public eye. Newspapers in the UK and Japan ran headlines that gripped readers with each new development. Broadcasts dissected the investigation, questioning how a suspect had managed to evade justice for so long. And then there was the book. When Ichihashi's memoir Until the Arrest was published, public outrage erupted. The idea that a man who had taken a life could later profit through words written in exile was deeply unsettling. His detailed account of his time on the run, of his self-performed surgeries, of his quiet life in hiding, was met with disgust. For Lindsay's family, it was an insult, a reminder that for 3 years, the man responsible for her death had roamed freely, reconstructing his face while they had been left to reconstruct their lives without her. Social media played a key role in keeping the case in the public consciousness. In the years before Ichihashi's capture, online forums and advocacy groups ensured that his name and face remained visible. Wanted posters circulated far beyond Japan, spreading across digital networks, ensuring that the world did not forget. Even after the trial, discussions about the case continued. Public opinion was divided. Some saw the sentencing as justice served, while others questioned how a fugitive had managed to avoid arrest for years. Many raised concerns about the broader implications of the case, about the systems that had failed Lindsay, about the gaps in law enforcement that had allowed a man to disappear so easily. Lindsay's case was not just an isolated tragedy. It exposed flaws in the way fugitives were tracked, in the mechanisms meant to ensure swift justice. It raised urgent questions about how law enforcement agencies handle international cases, about the challenges of monitoring individuals who are actively evading capture. Ichihashi's ability to alter his appearance so drastically, to remain undetected while moving between cities, highlighted the gaps in surveillance and identification processes. His eventual arrest, years after the crime, prompted discussions about what could have been done differently, about how authorities could prevent similar cases in the future. For expatriates living in Japan, Lindsay's story became a cautionary tale. Language barriers, cultural differences, and a sense of security in an unfamiliar place often led foreigners to lower their guard. But her case was a reminder that vigilance was necessary, that trust could not always be given freely, that even in a country known for its safety, precautions had to be taken. And for Lindsay's family, the message was clear. They did not want her story to be one of tragedy alone. They wanted it to be a call for change, a plea for better protections, for stronger measures to ensure that no other family had to endure what they had. Lindsay Ann Hawker had come to Japan full of hope. She had been a teacher, a traveler, a young woman with an entire future ahead of her. And though she had been taken too soon, her story would not be forgotten. Lindsay Ann Hawker's story did more than shock those who followed the case. It raised profound and urgent questions. Questions about personal safety, about trust, about the delicate balance between embracing new experiences and protecting oneself from unseen dangers. Her journey to Japan had been filled with the promise of adventure, of cultural exchange, of growth. She had stepped into an unfamiliar world with openness, eager to make an impact as a teacher, to connect with her students, to explore a country that fascinated her. But her fate was a devastating reminder that even in the safest of places, risks exist. For expatriates, teachers, travelers, professionals, there is an inherent vulnerability in being far from home. Language barriers can make it difficult to seek help in moments of distress. Cultural differences can blur the lines between what is normal and what is cause for concern. A misplaced sense of security can lead to trust being extended too freely, leaving individuals exposed to dangers they may not immediately recognize. Lindsay's case underscored the importance of awareness, of recognizing warning signs, of listening to instincts, of ensuring that communication lines remain open with loved ones, that locations are shared, that precaution is never seen as paranoia but rather as a necessary safeguard. It also shed light on the need for robust support systems. For foreign workers living in unfamiliar environments, access to resources, safety information, and emergency contacts can make the difference between vulnerability and security. Employers, embassies, and international organizations must play a greater role in ensuring that those who choose to work and live abroad are not left without guidance or protection. And beyond the individual level, the case sparked conversations about systemic gaps, about how fugitives are tracked, about how law enforcement agencies communicate across borders, about the flaws in a system that allowed a man to walk free for years despite being one of the most wanted criminals in Japan. But Lindsay's name should not be remembered only in the context of tragedy. Before she became the subject of headlines, she was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a teacher. She was a young woman who had loved biology, who had been drawn to the idea of shaping young minds, who had been described by those who knew her as kind, intelligent, full of life. Her time in Japan had been an extension of her adventurous spirit, a desire to experience something new, to immerse herself in a culture different from her own. She had walked into her classroom each day ready to teach, to inspire, to learn from her students as much as they learned from her. Her memory lives on not only through the pain of her loss, but through the lives she touched, through the students she guided, through the family who refuses to let her name fade into silence, through the awareness her story has created. Her parents have spoken of the empty space left in their lives, of the moments she should have been there for, birthdays, holidays, milestones that came and went without her. But they have also spoken of their determination to ensure that her life meant something beyond its tragic end. In the years since Lindsay's case, discussions around expatriate safety have become more urgent, ensuring that someone always knows where you are, of recognizing when a situation feels off and having the confidence to walk away. Embassies and international work programs have reinforced the need for clear safety protocols, for orientation programs that include not only cultural introductions, but also guidance on what to do in moments of distress. More resources have been made available, from emergency hotlines to safety apps, designed to help expatriates navigate unfamiliar places with greater security. Lindsay's story has left an imprint that extends beyond the courtroom, beyond the headlines. It serves as a reminder of the fragility of life, of the importance of awareness, of the steps that can and should be taken to ensure that no one else has to suffer the fate she did. Her name continues to be spoken, not just in grief but in action, in conversations about safety, in the decisions people make when they move abroad, in the efforts her family has made to push for change. Lindsay Ann Hawker was more than a victim. She was a bright, compassionate, ambitious young woman with dreams that stretched far beyond the walls of the classroom. And though her life was taken far too soon, her legacy remains, a call to remember, to learn, to protect, and to ensure that those who step into new experiences do so with the knowledge and support they need to stay safe.